Hi, I'm Patrick Height. I have been a member of Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church all my life. So as of this recording, we are approaching 55 years. But the congregation has been around since 1823. So this year, 2023, we are celebrating Zion's bicentennial. We've got a special worship service. We've got a dinner after the service. Jim Craig, the church's unofficial historian, and I don't know what it takes to make him the official historian, but church council should do whatever it needs to do to make him the official historian. In 2006, he wrote this book, which is a very detailed history of Zion Lutheran Church. And for the bicentennial, Jim has updated the history. So we are very appreciative of the work he has put in with that. And then we've got this video. I sat down with 23 people, current members, former pastors, and we just talked about memories of Zion Lutheran Church. Especially happy that we were able to catch up with all the living pastors, 5 former pastors and our current pastor, Wesley Smith, and you'll see all of them in this video. In fact, you'll see something from all 23 people that I talked to. You won't see everything. That would have been a 6 or 7 hour video. So if I talk to you and something you said is not in the video, doesn't mean it wasn't good. It just means I did not have time for everything. We are going to archive all of those videos so future generations can see the entire video. And then there's been some talk of maybe later this year releasing some of those full videos on YouTube just so you can see the entire interview. But this video itself comes in just under an hour. And we've got all kinds of things. We've got memories of Zion Lutheran Church. We've got some of the pastors talking about living in the parsonage, which when we owned it was right next door to the church itself. We've got pastors talking about when it was time to leave Zion Lutheran Church and what the church meant to them. But we're going to start out with coming to Zion Lutheran Church. Whether that as a pastor is your call or whether you are visiting for the first time considering joining Zion Lutheran Church, we've got several people talking about their first time at Zion Lutheran Church. So sit back and enjoy the oral history of Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church.
My earliest memory of Zion is before I even became pastor. There's a process we all go through when we're looking for a change of church and call. We have to fill out this endless array, like 40 pages of paperwork, and make it available to a bishop, and then the bishop sends it to a congregation, and Bob Humphrey had sent my paperwork here. I get a phone call early one morning, at least by my standard, then it was early. I've since adjusted to Virginia hours, but I was still not yet out of the home in the morning. So it's like 9 o'clock, but anyway. Where was I? So I get this phone call. The gentleman introduces himself as Humes Franklin, says he's chair of the call committee, and that the call committee at Zion in Waynesboro has looked over my paperwork, and he wanted to know if I would like to go further and set up interviews and be very serious about coming down here to Zion. And I said, sure, yes, I would love to do that. And there was a pause. He said, well, good, let me tell you something about myself. He said, I'm a circuit county judge, and I have 7 defendants coming before me today, and you've just made their life a whole lot easier. And so that was the start. And I'll tell you another story. The day that Zion voted as a congregation whether to accept me as pastor or not. I don't remember the date, but it was the Sunday morning after the Saturday night that UVA basketball got creamed by 64 seed. Who was?
UMBC, Maryland, Baltimore County.
Maryland, Baltimore. And I thought, oh, great, because I knew this was, So anyway, the vice president of the council at that time was Dean Bowe. He said the church will meet after for a vote. It'll take a few minutes. I'll get in touch with you, 11:15. So I'm sitting at home with my phone, 11:15, 11:30, 11:45. I think, what in the world is going on? And I honestly thought that you all were in such a bad mood because UVA lost the basketball game. So Dean Bowe finally called me and said, well, there's just a lot of conversation. And I told him my concern, and Dean paused. He said, well, if the school that beat UVA was from New Jersey, you might have been turned down.
And the way I found Zion Lutheran was through the little gift shop that my wife and I had in the 1980s. This nice gentleman would come in and order books, which is something that we did. And one time this gentleman ordered the Liturgy of the Ancient Christians until 1099. So I had to ask him, are you a teacher? I'm just curious about your selection. He goes, no, actually I'm a pastor. And he gave me his card. It was Bob Humphrey. And on the back of his card, there was a little primitive map of how to get to Zion, or we never would have found it. So we went to a lot of different churches in the Waynesboro area. Darcy, having grown up in Waynesboro, everyone thought they knew her from the word go. One of the best parts about coming out here is nobody knew us from Adam's Cat. And we got a fresh start, very friendly, welcoming. Somebody scooped Allison, who was a babe in arms, up to the nursery, which was a big step for us.
The first story is about the first time I came to Zion to preach in 1993. I came over from Charlottesville. Now, 1993 was before this thing called the internet. It was before cell phones, and it was before Zion had a street address. A week or two before I was going to preach at Zion, I got a postcard in the mail from the Synod office, and it had the information for Zion on the postcard, but of course I didn't read the postcard. I waited till Sunday morning to look at the postcard to find the address of Zion Lutheran Church over the mountain in Waynesboro, and here's what the address said. It said Zion Lutheran Church, Route 1, Box 414, which meant I had no idea where Zion Lutheran Church was, okay? But I came over the mountain. I took 250. Now the church teaches, and I believe that it's true, that the Holy Spirit sends someone to a particular congregation. But the woman behind the counter at the Speedway gas station at the bottom of Afton Mountain had a whole lot to do with it. Because I came over the mountain, I looked at this postcard, Route 1, Box 414. I went into the Speedway. I asked the woman behind the counter, I said, have you ever heard of Zion Lutheran Church? And she said, well, there's one downtown, but I don't think its name is Zion. She said, but I think there's a little country church about a mile north of the district home. So I said, well, where's the district home? So she gave me directions to the district home. I went up the hill from the district home, and lo and behold, a mile up the road was this place called Zion Lutheran Church. So yeah, while the Holy Spirit leads you to a congregation, the woman at Speedway had a whole lot to do with it.
When we first moved to Charlottesville, I asked a colleague of my dad's where we should go. That was Pastor Lou Smith of blessed memory. And he said, well, if you want the best preaching, go to Zion. So we did. And we also visited a few others, but he was right. So we visited again, and besides the preaching, we liked the intact liturgy. We liked the absence of things like clowns or sock puppets during the liturgy. And the clincher was the pews, because the church I grew up in had curved wooden pews, and I had never seen them anywhere else except here. So I took it as a sign.
I'd like to perhaps surprise you a little by telling you about my first experience as a worshiper at Zion. And that happened not in the past 10 years or so, but it happened in 1954 when I was, well, a lot younger than I am now. We knew the Huddle family, and Max Huddle was the pastor at Zion and St. James at that time. So one summer when we were going on vacation, it was the summer of 1954, we came to Zion to worship because there was an early service and we could be on our way after the service. I'll never forget coming into Zion, because here were the men sitting on one side, the women sitting on the other side. What is this? I've never seen something like this before. I wonder if any of the other interviewees who are older have mentioned this. But it certainly made an impression on me. I think my parents and I ended up sitting on the women's side. Perhaps that seemed a little less dangerous than sitting with all these stern-looking men.
Hi, this is Bill and Judy Kirkendall. We're members here maybe between 16 and 17 years now. And my story has to do with the fact that we had, when we moved here from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, we were looking for a church home. We wanted it to be a Lutheran church. We had visited several, and we wanted to look around and see what was available. So we one day picked Zion and started to try and find it, first of all, because when we came in, Dalhousie was a dirt road, and we got on this dirt road, and I looked at Judy and she looked at me, and she said, "Where the heck are we going?" And I said, "Well, I'm just following the signs." So we came around, and when we came around the corner, this beautiful little church with its cemetery and the cows out around it was there. So that was nice. The other thing that was nice was my church back at home when I was growing up was Zion Lutheran Church.
I came to Zion Church as a graduate out of Southern Seminary. I had just finished all of my courses at Southern Seminary and was interviewed by, back then, the folks from Zion and St. James, because they were joined together as one parish. So I came there in 1967 with great anticipation of the call, and I was received very well. And of course, I came with all of that knowledge from the seminary. And I remember I was told at the seminary, don't unload it all at the same time. So I tried to not do that, except one little problem I had for my first Advent time there. They wanted to sing Christmas carols during Advent, and we had to work through that little crinkle a little bit. But I moved on from that, I believe. And also the parsonage was then purchased between the two congregations, and it was in Fishersville, I believe on Highway 250, if I remember correctly, a very lovely little home. And I guess I remember also some of the things that happened were the joint things that we did with Grace Church in Waynesboro, such as confirmation classes, were held together jointly with them. And then the Lenten services, I remember those things quite well.
One of the stories I definitely wanted to include in this little walk down memory lane that involves your family is that on the first Sunday I was to preach at Zion, there was a huge ice storm. I was all nervous because, this is a big deal. It's an ice storm. I had no idea whether anybody's even going to be there. Your grandfather showed up in a truck, and Humes and Barbara and my wife Barbara and me and my preaching robe all piled into the cab of the truck. And we slipped and slided down Hickory Hill and around the corners and down into the parking lot, and had a number of people there. But I forgot my sermon at Barbara and Humes's house. Luckily, because I was so nervous and I had practiced it so often, I was able to kind of wing it and preach the sermon. And afterwards, the call committee and many members of the congregation were like, wow, we were so impressed. I mean, it didn't even look like you used any notes at all.
That's great. You had them all fooled. That's
all fooled. So that's probably how I got the call. It just, well, the end of that story is that after David had made his way back up to Hickory Hill and dropped us off, not all the way at the top of the drive, but part way up the drive, he returned. He was headed back home to Martha. Only he didn't make it all the way home. The truck slipped off the road and into the field. And for a couple of hours, Martha was calling, going, well, where is David? He walked back to the house.
We went home, and your dad called, and he said, was my dad at church? And I said, yeah, he was at church. He said, well, he hadn't gotten home. Well, Barbara and I got in the car and started at 6:08. Sure enough, his truck was over the back. And Barbara said, see if Mr. Heights. I said, you go down there. I don't want to go down there. So Barbara went down the back, got down the bank, and he was gone. Your dad, when the truck slid off the road, he walked home.
Let us come around the church corner. Daddy was so much about this kind of church bit that he, when we go around the corner up here around the turn, he said, y'all be quiet, now we're almost in church. We let us sing, we let us talk, we let us do nothing, because we're almost in church. Everything has to be quiet.
And you couldn't turn around and look around like this. You have to say straight ahead. And every time you start pound you in the knee.
What do you remember, Carol? What memories stand out to you?
Well, I really never felt as much at home anywhere else as I have since I've come here. When I came here, it was just like coming back to the family. All the family was always here. There were Davises everywhere. So
Davis ran the church, I think.
It was just like going to a reunion, really.
Yeah, for a long time, it was pretty much all Davises.
It was. Now it's sure close.
And if it wasn't a Davis, they were kin to them. They were some way or another kin to them.
Life out here starts a whole lot sooner in the day than it ever started for me before. I mean, I won't, get too personal here about how late I would sleep, but when I came down here, I mean, I've actually had meetings in the morning with people at 7 o'clock. Who ever heard of meeting with people at 7 o'clock or getting together for things like before morning coffee? But that was a bit of an adjustment, but it is also humorous in its own way. It gives Zion its own particular little identity. We're an early to rise, early to bed congregation, and I guess I just kind of followed suit along with that, but it works really well.
Not all of us get up that early. Just so you know.
Well, I've learned. And then, of course, I came down here and the men's breakfast, we moved it to 7:30, but for the longest time it started at 7 in the morning. I think, what? Anyway, I guess I can get up for a good breakfast, so that works out all right in the end, too.
I have a hat that I brought with me this morning. One of my signature hat of our centennial celebration, August the 28th, 1994. We celebrated the 100th anniversary of our church. And for that occasion, our pastor, Jim Pence, council, a few other folks decided that it would be appropriate to try to recreate the flavor of 1894 when the cornerstone was laid out here. So we were encouraged to dress similar to the way people dressed in 1894. I searched all over Harrisonburg for this hat, and the reason I did, back during the 1950s, when I was just a young child in this congregation, I remember the older men coming in on Sunday mornings wearing hats. They were large felt hats similar to what's known as Stetson hats, black and brown. Two of our members that I can really remember every Sunday coming in was Charlie Ramsey and Charlie Craig. They would come in, turn left, file around, and they left that hat on until they sat down. Then they took it off. That's something that I really remember from those times.
One of the things that might have been a little tricky for folks was I agreed to have our congregation test the new hymnal. I had grown up with the service book and hymnal, the Red Book, and the church wanted to bring out a new hymnal. They said, who would be willing to test it? So they sent us these paperback versions of the liturgy and a few hymns, and so we struggled through. I guess I subjected the congregation to that. So we struggled through it. Ruth Hoy was the pianist and organist, and eventually then what we did was we practiced it and learned. We learned the part about this is the feast of victory for our God, right out of the book of Revelation, one of my favorite. And that became then the Lutheran Book of Worship. So we had a hand in that.
When Joy and I joined, we were looking for a church home. Like the Kirkendalls, we found a great welcome here. We knew Jim and Marcia from earlier chapters of our lives. But we weren't married yet, and we got married in the summer of '99, and didn't really know exactly what to plan. But one of the greatest welcomes that we ever had was when we decided to have our wedding here. Marianne Height and associated other people along with Marianne said, "Don't worry about the reception. We'll take care of the reception." So we had a fantastic, the wedding was great, but the reception was even better.
It was wonderful. Well, they did everything. We were blown away by that invitation, because we had like a sit-down dinner and all the food was provided, and we were just like overwhelmed. We couldn't believe that such a loving church could be where we're going to be, and it was just wonderful.
So it was a terrific welcome, and it's been welcoming ever since.
My name is Vivian Salkeld. I joined Zion Lutheran Church back in the early 70s. And something that really impressed me very much was the first day we were here, Donna Kay and Helen Swisham and Ruby came over and welcomed us like we really belonged in the church. But as the years went by, we had Pastor Humphrey was our pastor. And I sang in the choir, which I loved very much. And the pastor said, let's bring in the little children. We had a lot of little children then. And I was very close to the Martin family, so Allison Martin always called me Biverin. And she said, I want to walk with Biverin. So we put the children down in the first row. Coming out, everybody got a little confused, and she was sitting there like she was going to cry. And she said, I'm waiting for Biverin to take me down. So that was one very, very special time that I remembered.
The second story I want to tell is one morning early in my ministry here, got a knock at the front door of the parsonage, and it was Joe and Isabel Fitzgerald. They had their big old Buick, or whatever it was, and Isabel says, get in the car. I thought, oh, what's going to happen here? So I get in the back seat. I don't know if they were going to take me out to the woods. I don't know what they were going to do. But what they did was they drove me to the home of every member of the congregation, not to go inside, but to sit out front so that I knew where their houses were, so that I could later go and visit them. And then while we sat out front, with probably the members of the congregation inside wondering what the heck we were doing out front, they told me a little bit about the history of every single member of the congregation. And that let me know that in the minds of Zion, one of the things that was right up at the top of the list in terms of expectations of a pastor was pastoral care. A pastor would get to know where the people lived, he would get to know the people, and he would be with them in all of the times of their lives, you know. And yeah, throughout my 24 years, I was in every single person's home many times to share family events, to be with them when their kids were born. I remember being in Roger and Leona Davis's house when Leona was dying, and we were I was holding her hand, and the family was all gathered around her, and tears were flowing, and prayers were being said, and we walked out on the front porch after praying, and the funeral director came over to me at the time and said, wow, this is probably one of the worst things you have to do in your ministry. And I thought, well, kind of ironically and strangely, this is kind of one of the best things I get to do in my ministry. You know, you kind of invited into people's lives in those vulnerable moments, in those celebratory moments, but also in those literal life and death moments, you know. You're allowed to be in their lives, and then as a Christian pastor, to bring to that moment, to bring to their lives a word that no one else has been called on earth to say. So, no, you're really honored to be a part of their lives in that way.
When we were changing the light out here on the pole here this past year, or the other year, we were talking about it and trying to figure out how long that light had been up there. And finally it was brought to my attention that my dad and Henry were the ones that put it up there. And I said, well, it had to be Dad that helped with it, because the switch was backwards. Because he couldn't put a switch in unless he put it in upside down. So I said it had to be him that helped put it in. It worked, but it was just upside down.
And I started on June 8th, 1989. Janice and I had graduated May. No, I didn't go June 8th was the date I was ordained. I started June 19th, 1989. And it was an interesting time because Janice left at the end of June to go study at the Goethe Institute for 2 months. So that summer was really a wonderful opportunity just to focus on getting to know the congregation. And my dean in seminary had always said that you should get to know your people and love your people. And he said, in your first year in ministry, just really focus on preaching, teaching, and visiting. And that was what I did. And I was always, there were so many wonderful people that I had a chance to get to know, so many stories of faith that I got to hear. And really, the sense of love that I received from people was outstanding. There are people from Zion who to this day continue to shape who I am, not just as a pastor, but as a person. I learned life lessons. Things that I learned at Zion helped make me a better husband, better father, better person. Yeah, so the level of gratitude that I have for Zion Lutheran Church is tremendous. And I've always felt that I received far more there than anyone I'd have ever known. I certainly hope the congregation felt blessed by my presence. So very grateful for that.
But we had a lot of kids. You said you had a story about Bob Hughes. What is that story?
Well, it happened at our house.
Okay.
He and Barbara always went, whenever they went anywhere, if they went by somebody's house that belonged to the church, they'd often stop in and visit with them. And so one day they were up in the Stanton area, so they came by our house, and it just happened Junior and I were gone. So Bob came up to the door, and when he rang the doorbell, nobody came. So he turned around to go back to the car, and there was a great big old billy goat standing at the bottom of the steps. It just happened that our neighbors had a billy goat that was mean and wouldn't stay in his fence. So he tried everything he could think of to get past that goat, because he just stood there shaking his head. And so finally Barbara realized what was happening. So she drove the car up in the yard and scared the billy goat away so he could get in the car. But he was always afraid to come to the house after that unless he called first.
And I remember before we built these, we would have Sunday school back in the balcony and in those little small rooms at the back of the sanctuary. The adult class would meet in the sanctuary. And the kids would meet in the balcony or in the small rooms at the back. Another thing that I can remember, and this was in later years, I taught a bunch of teenagers Sunday school class.
Now he tells me.
One of the students that was in my class was Glenn Hemp. And I think, as far as I know, he's probably the only one that is still coming to church. Whether my Sunday school class had anything to do with that, I don't know. Right. I'm very proud of Glenn, who, as people know, is our current vice president of the congregation.
I have a couple pictures I wanted to show you.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Oh, wow.
There's me with Mamaw Davis and Ruth Holt.
Wow.
Ruth was our organist, of course, and Mamaw the matriarch of the Davis family. At the time I started, it was easy for especially people to say, you know, everybody in church on Sunday morning, not necessarily every member, but everybody in church on Sunday morning is related to Mamaw in some way or another. It's important, new pastor, that you keep that in mind when you talk about folks. It's like, okay, I got it.
Yeah, definitely very much a Davis oriented congregation when you were there at that time.
Absolutely.
And Mamaw had her own seat, right? I mean, she had the one seat there where she sat in every Sunday.
They did, and when she died, they kept her sort of comforter there for a good while, I'm sure. So, yeah. Every year we would host a little party at our incredible parsonage, and people would come and hang out, and here was Junior Davis, who's holding our daughter Jill, Deanie and Claude Shover, and Carol Davis. Isn't that cool?
That's a cool picture right there.
We also had big snows while we were there. One of them was so deep that we ended up having to cancel winter celebration, which I was directing at the time. And until COVID came, it was the only time winter celebration had ever been canceled, which was a major youth event in our Virginia Synod. Now, here's one that might seem somewhat familiar. There we go. It's one of the confirmation classes. And believe it or not, you are in this picture.
I recognize, I think I recognize most everybody in that picture. Wow. That's a pretty good sized confirmation class for Zion.
It really was. Yep, it really was. More of those folks sitting around our table there at the parsonage. Don't you love the wallpaper?
Very much for the times, I guess.
Yes, indeed. We also had big celebrations at Zion, and one of the things we would do is dress up and, you know, kind of do things right. So one year I dressed up as Luther, and we had a birthday party for Luther.
So is that Martin Luther's 500th birthday? Is that what that was for?
Birthday.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
Now, confirmation classes, everybody wore a tie, a suit, and a jacket, and paid careful attention. Recognize anybody in those pictures?
Yeah, I think that looks familiar. Wow.
It might. It's David Hinkle.
Yeah, David
Patrick. But it wasn't all dressed up and, you know, look real churchy. Sometimes we dressed up like chickens and cows and roosters and who knows what all else. And we put on plays for Christmas programs. These are pictures with which, you know, you can blackmail a bunch of people that are in these pictures here, I'm sure.
I think I'm
Fretwells, most Franklin's, of them.
And yeah, there's a young
Charters, and yep. Oh, and then there was that time that we hung out with then President Ronald Reagan at the in Washington, D.C. Well, okay. The truth is, it was a cutout of the president, and we got to stand by it and get our picture made like thousands of other people. But we did go to Washington, D.C. as part of our confirmation ministry.
That's as close as you're going to get to a president, I would imagine. So.
And then just for you, I included one that included a whole bunch, 3 generations of your family.
Oh wow! Look at that. Dad still had hair. I still had hair.
We did Bible school for years and years, and when I was here, there was a lot of kids in this church when I was growing up. That was the nice thing. There was really a lot of youth and a lot of good memories, and the plays we did plays. We did Mary Had a Little Lamb and Bones, and we had a children's choir, and just a lot of good memories and a lot of family. And the church always chicken barbecues. Oh my gosh, all the chicken barbecues we did when I was a kid. I remember Dad would always get up and go with John Ocker, and they'd go up into Stanton and set up real early in the morning and get chicken going, and so yeah, lots of good memories.
One of my favorite memories from my youth was our weekly Sunday school session that was moderated by the superintendent of the Sunday school, Guy Kirby. Guy was the superintendent of this Sunday school for 30 to 40 years, long time. And I remember Guy standing up here on Sunday mornings, and the whole fellowship hall here was loaded up with chairs. People were sitting, and I mean, there was a lot of people here. A lot of children, a lot of adults, and we would sing maybe one hymn prior to Sunday school, going into session on Sunday mornings, and then at the end of the Sunday school session, when things were wrapping up for the day, when he would sing another hymn, sometimes 2 hymns. And Guy was always here, right here at this lectern. I can still see Guy Kirby standing here. And I remember him at the end always saying, "Sunday school dismissed." And I was happy. I was happy when that occurred because I wanted to get home and enjoy some of Helen Craig's Sunday fried chicken and pound cake and canned peaches. I mean, you know, but those types of things just have stuck with me all of these years. I mean, 60 years now.
We did some celebration kinds of things too. I remember on Saturday nights we do our takeoff on Hee Haw. I started learning to play guitar in seminary, and then I came there and kept taking guitar lessons. Eventually, I tried to learn banjo. That didn't do too well, but people were very kind and gracious, and they would applaud. And we had a lot of fun. Another thing, kind of a fun thing, we had a basketball team, the Waynesboro Recreation Department. I still got my jersey, and that was my number.
Well, yeah, you're the pastor. You got to be number 1, right?
Yeah, I thought about giving this to the church to hang up in the rafter somewhere to retire the number, but it wouldn't really go well with the decor, I don't think. But I still got the jersey.
And you said you lived in Fishersville with the parsonage. So you were, until our current pastor, I guess you were the last pastor to not live in the parsonage that was right across, that Zion built right across the road from the church, which is interesting.
No, yeah, that happened. Well, I know that the money for that came from Bess Woodson, if I remember it correctly. She was a very interesting lady. I remember visiting her often, and I remember she was sort of living in one room. And I went one time in the cold of winter to visit with her, and the potbelly stove was flaming away. And she asked me to cook her, warm up her baby food. So we had to get a pan and put water in and put it on the stove and warm up her baby food so she would have something to eat. But she was a very unique person going way. I believe her husband was in the Spanish-American War, if I'm correct on that.
Married in January 1976, so that's 47 years now. And folks, and you moved, Judy, then moved into my apartment. It's kind of embarrassing. I had to take the mimeograph machine out to the church to make a place for her sewing machine. And just the things I didn't think of, moving this woman in with me had to make some changes. But that was the best thing I ever did. Well, not the mimeograph. That was just one part of it. So then, and they were building the parsonage, or started it. I guess they were maybe building it when we got, and they were very gracious about letting us pick out the color of carpet on some things and modify a couple things and orient it so that the architect worked with us to have it so that folks could come just to the first door and not have to go in the whole house to have a meeting and to get to my office, come around the side if they needed to. So it was designed as a pretty functional house as well as being a parsonage. So we were married in 76, moved into the house. I'm trying to think whether it was that fall or the fall after.
I'm pretty, so herein lies this quilt that I am sure your grandmom had a hand in. I am sure. Can you see
I can.
Yeah.
Judy, is that 4177?
7?
Okay.
And I'm sure that Carol Davis had a hand in it. Ellen Swisher. I'm not
those folks I'm sure of. I don't know.
Yes, Mama was still there at that
And
time.
Mama may have had
Okay.
your great grandmom.
With you, Judy, moving, meeting Bob and then coming into the church as the pastor's wife, what is that like for you? What was that like for you, kind of becoming there after he had been established, he had been there for a while? What was the experience like for you?
Patrick, I don't know if you remember what it's like getting married. That was the hard part. But I still wonder when I think about the kindness, the generosity, the warmth, the embrace, the whole time we were there, not just the entry, but the entire time we were there. And our firstborn was born while we were there. And Donna and Sharon and
Barbara
Franklin all loaned me maternity clothes.
Barbara Franklin was our first babysitter.
Barbara Franklin was our first babysitter. And Diane Bayer taught me how to change a diaper. I had never changed a diaper. And yeah. And Joe Fitzgerald teased me unmercifully. And it made me feel so much at home. I mean, that was the style of connection my granddad would have had, and my dad too, probably. And so yeah, I just could not say enough about what a rich and warm beginning to our life that whole experience was.
Only other thing I'd say that I played a big part in when Jim first came, he was not married. Jim and Marcia got married and were living in the parsonage, which is now their house. The parsonage, of course, was built with some of the best Woodson funds. Well, Jim and Marcia called us up and said, we'd like to go house hunting, because he didn't want to just have the allowance go to rent. So we took one Saturday and spent all from Saturday noon till almost 5 o'clock riding around and looking at everything. And as we were coming back, I said to him, why don't you buy the parsonage? We've been wanting to get rid of the parsonage, and not be responsible for the maintenance and upkeep and this sort of thing. I said, well, why don't you buy the parsonage? Well, sure enough, they liked that idea, and we worked it out. We had it appraised so that it was an arm's length transaction, and sold Jim and Marcia the parsonage. That's the origin of the Best Woodson Fund.
Vietnam War was going on, and I'd been somewhat involved with the peace movement while I was senior year in seminary in Columbia, South Carolina. Kent State had just happened, the shootings at Kent State in April, I think it was. So it was a very turbulent time for the country and for me, and I arrived with this head full of theology and things ought to be different. And one thing I did anything horrible, but if I were doing it over, I'd do some things differently. So if there are those that I offended or disappointed, I regret that. And like I say, I would do things differently. But I'm aware that those 10 years in Waynesboro were really helpful for me. That the stability of the congregation and the love and affection the congregation shared meant a great deal. So I'm convinced when I left after 10 years, I left a better person, I'm sure a better pastor, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the folks who were part of that, and many of them have died by now. I pass on my gratitude, and however they can receive it. And those who are still living, I want you to know that I am very grateful.
I was at Zion just under 3.5 years. I believe we left in October of 1992, and one of the things that happened for us, is Janice and I, we had Mark, and Janice ended up being called to a parish that was about 50 miles south of Zion, the 2 Point Parish, and we both loved our ministries. What became challenging is after we had Mark, having this 50 miles between calls and a newborn child, and sometimes we felt like Mark, we had the little carrier, and sometimes we were just handing the carrier off to one another. It was sort of it was a little challenging at times. So we realized we needed to be closer to, as far as serving, closer together. And that was a large part of why we ended up, moving to, South Central PA. So 3.5 years. And I would say there's, as I look back on that, we can't change anything of the past, but if I could, I would have loved to have stayed longer. And in many ways, I was learning how to be a pastor. You can go to seminary, but you only learn to be a pastor by being a pastor. And Zion as a congregation gave me the grace to learn and to make mistakes. But I really appreciated the grace of the congregation. And I always found that as a whole, the people of Zion are really salt of the earth and really good folks.
My name is Jim Pence. I was Zion's pastor from 1993 until 2017 when I retired. I was a Lutheran pastor for 41 years, and I was at a lot of nice places, University of Virginia, nice congregations up in Pennsylvania. But without a doubt, the 24 years that I was pastor at Zion were the best years by far of my ministry. No doubt about it. The best years because Zion was everything in my mind that a Christian congregation ought to be. It was unbelievably diverse. It was diverse in terms of education levels. My wife had a PhD. We had a member of the congregation who finished 7th grade. It was diverse in terms of economics. We had very, very poor people. We had some wealthy people. It was very diverse in terms of politics. But everybody kind of parked those differences at the door, came in, and they were exactly what a Christian congregation ought to be. They united around the universality of sin. They all said that same confession. They all looked in a mirror. They all realized that the problem wasn't, what do they say, that little speck in the eye of the guy that you differ with on things, but the problem was the big huge log in your own eye, and they really took all that seriously. So yeah, the 24 years that I was at Zion were by far the best of my ministry.
I think one of the things that makes Zion distinct among churches today is its adherence to a tried and true liturgy, one that has stood the test of time, one that is biblically based, and one which is sung and chanted and spoken with great conviction. One of my favorite lines about the liturgy is, it actually comes from a Jewish scholar, not a Christian theologian, but when it's true, it's true. His name is Abraham Heschel, and what he said is that the liturgy does not exist to say what we mean. The liturgy is there for us to say what it means. The point there is that the liturgy, in many ways, well, it goes back to Scripture, goes back in some ways to even Old Testament temple times, is in one way or another a couple thousand years old. And over these 2,000 plus years, the liturgy has been worked on and refined to a way that says, how does a worship experience on a Sunday morning bring God to us, the awareness of God's presence, and give us an opportunity to rejoice and give thanks in return for God's good news? What we do here at Zion really honors and values the purpose of a liturgy, which is to work out the whole story of our place in God's redemption, giving thanks for what He's done, having an opportunity to live lives in accordance with His good news. And I would like to give thanks to Jim and the other predecessors here at Zion who all had a role in that. I came in, it was easy for me. All the hard work had been done. Everybody here at Zion not only knew the liturgy, but knew why we do it. So I just stepped in, and it's been a cinch because of that.